Welcome to Christ's Word, where everyday lives meet the light of God's Word. Here, we don't preach. We tell stories. Moments of doubt, turning points, quiet revelations, all woven with raw emotion and unshakable faith. You're not just listening to someone else's journey. You might just find your own reflection in it. And maybe, just maybe, by the end, you'll discover the answer you've been searching for. In a world that feels increasingly divided, where anger and hatred seem to rule, one woman's life was shattered by an unimaginable loss. Imagine a family torn apart by violence, a tragedy so deep that it feels like the very essence of their being was ripped from them in an instant. This is the story of a daughter, who woke up one day to find her life completely altered by the brutal killing of her parents in a violent conflict. The pain was indescribable, the grief overwhelming, and the rage she felt, unbearable. But what if I told you that the journey of pain and hatred would eventually lead her to the most profound lesson of her life? That her heart, full of anger and sorrow, would find its way to the light, not through vengeance, but through an act of unimaginable forgiveness. The night her parents were murdered was like any other, until it wasn't. She had just gone to bed, still feeling the weight of the day on her shoulders. Her parents had been in a heated argument earlier, their voices echoing through the house. They had fought countless times before, but nothing could prepare her for what was about to happen. As the silence of the night settled in, she heard the door creak open. At first, she thought it was just another one of their arguments, but the sound that followed was anything but familiar. The shot rang out, loud and piercing, echoing through the quiet night. Her heart stopped, and for a moment, everything around her seemed to go still. But the stillness didn't last. The chaos that followed was like a storm, violent, relentless, and cruel. By the time the authorities arrived, it was too late. Her parents were gone. The girl, now alone, stood at the crossroads of a path she never asked for. Her mind raced. How could anyone do such a thing? How could someone take away the people she loved most in the world? The pain was unbearable, and the anger, oh the anger, it consumed her. How could she move on? How could she ever forgive? This was her reality now, living with the loss, trapped in a whirlwind of emotions she could not escape. But there was more to this story. There was a way out, a way that would not come from vengeance or rage, but from something much deeper, something she could never have imagined at that moment. The question was, could she find it? It was only when a close friend stepped into her life that things started to change. Her friend, understanding the depth of her pain, had heard about a Christian seminar, one focused on the teachings of forgiveness. She encouraged the girl to attend, despite her doubts. "I don't need anyone to tell me how to forgive," she had said. "You don't understand the depth of my loss. I can't forgive." But her friend's words lingered in her heart, and something inside her, a whisper of hope, made her agree to attend. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for her to heal. As the seminar began, she sat quietly, trying to hold back her emotions. The speaker spoke with such passion, his words piercing through her cold walls of anger. He spoke of a love so deep, a love that could heal the darkest of wounds. He spoke of forgiveness, not as a burden, but as a freedom. "Forgiveness is not for the one who hurt you," he said. "Forgiveness is for you, so that you may be free." These words hit her like a thunderbolt. She had never considered forgiveness in that way before. Could it be true? Could forgiving the person who took her parents away bring her peace, instead of more pain? Was this the path to healing, to peace? Or was it just an impossible dream? And yet, she couldn't shake the thought. It haunted her, gnawed at her every waking moment. She was torn between her desire for revenge and the glimmer of hope she saw in those words. But how could she even begin to forgive someone who had destroyed everything she had known? The session ended, and she walked out of the building, her mind swirling with questions. But then, something unexpected happened. She ran into an old woman on the street, a woman she had never met before. The woman looked at her with kind eyes and said, "I don't know your story, dear, but I can see the pain in your eyes. Forgiveness is the only way to move forward. It's not easy, but it's worth it. It was as if the universe had conspired to send her one final message. The woman didn't know her, didn't know the horror she had lived through. But her words rang true, louder than any other sound in her life. Forgiveness is the only way to move forward. She walked home that night, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders, but for the first time, she felt a small seed of hope planted in her heart. Could she really forgive the person who had destroyed her world? Could she find peace, not through hate, but through love? The journey had only just begun, and she knew that what lay ahead would be even more challenging than the grief she had already endured. But one thing was certain, the pain, the grief, the anger, it could no longer define her. There had to be more. There had to be a way forward. What happens next? What will this young woman do with the powerful message she received? Will she choose the path of anger, or will she take the difficult step toward forgiveness, toward healing? You'll have to stay tuned to find out. Life after loss was not kind to her. The world around her seemed to fade into shades of gray, like a painting slowly being washed out by rain. It wasn't just the tragedy of her parents' death that consumed her, it was the emptiness that followed. Nothing felt real anymore. The house they had lived in was now a hollow shell, each room echoing with the memories of happier days. The memories of their laughter, the way her mother used to hum while cooking, and how her father's voice used to boom with excitement when telling stories, all of that was now gone. The silence left behind was deafening. She had moved back to her parents' house after the funeral, hoping that familiarity would bring comfort. But each creak of the floorboards felt like a cruel reminder of what she had lost. Her once warm home now felt like a cold, distant place. She kept to herself, too consumed by the grief to interact with the world around her. Every time she looked in the mirror, the woman staring back at her seemed like a stranger filled with anger and loss. She tried to live her life the best she could, but it was clear that the world around her was as broken as she was. Friends who used to check in on her stopped calling. Family members avoided bringing up the topic of her parents' death. People didn't know what to say, so they said nothing at all. The isolation was suffocating. And then, there was the anger. It was like an uninvited guest in her life, never leaving, always lurking in the background. She was angry at the world for being so unjust. She was angry at the person who took away her parents. And more than anything, she was angry at herself, for not being able to move past it. For not being able to let go. The anger clouded her every thought. It made her feel alive, but it was the kind of alive that slowly ate away at her soul. It made her feel powerful, but in reality, it only made her weaker. The more she held on to it, the more she sank into despair. Her life, once full of promise and possibility, now felt like a prison. And within that prison, she found herself asking questions she hadn't dared to ask before. Why? Why did this have to happen? Why couldn't they have been there for me? Why did I have to face this alone? But then, one night, as she sat alone in the living room staring at the empty chair where her father used to sit, another question crept into her mind, one she wasn't ready to confront. What if forgiveness is the only way out? She shook her head. Forgiveness? How could that even be possible? How could she ever forgive the person who did this to her? Forgiveness felt like an impossible task, like asking her to forgive the storm that destroyed everything in its path. The thought of it felt wrong. It felt like weakness. She wasn't ready to let go of her pain, not yet. But in the midst of her turmoil, something unexpected happened. One evening, as she was sitting in the park, watching the children play, a woman approached her. This woman, who seemed to have lived a lifetime of her own struggles, sat beside her and spoke softly, "I can see the pain in your eyes, my dear. I've been where you are. But holding on to the pain, it's not the answer. It will only keep you trapped." At first, the woman's words seemed foreign to her, like a language she couldn't understand. How could someone who hadn't been through what she had possibly understand her pain? But there was something in the woman's voice, something comforting, almost reassuring. The woman didn't ask for her to forgive anyone, not yet. She simply said, "The first step to healing is letting go of the burden you've been carrying." The girl didn't know what to say. She had never been one to open up about her feelings, and certainly not to a stranger. But something in that moment clicked. The woman's words lingered in her mind as she went back to her empty house that night. That night, she sat alone with her thoughts, wrestling with the words that had been planted in her heart. Let go. Forgiveness. Healing. All of these words felt so distant to her, like they belonged in a world far removed from her own. But as she thought about it, something shifted inside her. Maybe the anger wasn't helping her. Maybe holding on to the pain wasn't making her stronger, it was making her weaker. It was during this time that her thoughts turned to her faith. She had been raised with the teachings of Christianity, but she had always viewed them from a distance. It had been easy to believe in God's love when life was simple, when everything was good. But now, in the face of such overwhelming grief, she couldn't understand how God's love could exist in a world filled with so much pain. She closed her eyes, and a verse from the Bible echoed in her mind, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." She hadn't heard it in years, but it came rushing back to her now. The words didn't make sense. Love your enemies. Pray for those who hurt you. It was almost impossible to comprehend. She felt torn. On one hand, she was trapped by her own anger and desire for revenge. On the other, she couldn't ignore the gentle pull of something greater, something more powerful than her pain. Could she even begin to understand what this meant? Could it be possible that forgiveness was the key to her freedom? Her heart was heavy with uncertainty, but something inside her told her that she had to keep moving forward. The girl knew this wasn't going to be easy, that the road ahead would be filled with more doubts, more questions, and more pain. But for the first time, she felt like there was a flicker of light, a flicker of hope, just beyond the horizon. The question now wasn't whether she could forgive. The real question was, could she trust enough to begin the journey of healing? The days that followed were a blur. She couldn't focus at work, couldn't concentrate on anything. Her mind kept drifting back to that verse from the Bible, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." The words repeated in her mind, over and over again, like a constant echo in the back of her head. She had never really understood it before, but now, in the midst of her pain, they felt impossible to ignore. She tried to push them aside, but the more she resisted, the more they consumed her. She couldn't help but wonder, what if this was the answer? What if forgiveness was the way to finally let go of the pain? The thought terrified her. It meant acknowledging the depth of her loss, confronting the anger that had defined her for so long. It meant facing the person who had stolen everything from her. How could she possibly forgive someone like that? One evening, after another long day of wrestling with her thoughts, she found herself sitting alone in her living room, staring blankly at the walls. The house felt like a prison. No matter how much she tried to move forward, she couldn't escape the weight of her grief, her anger, her hatred. It was as if they were shadows that followed her everywhere she went. Then, she received a call from her friend, the same friend who had suggested she attend the Christian seminar. She hadn't spoken to her in days. Her friend, sensing something was wrong, asked, "How are you doing?" The girl hesitated. She wanted to say that she was fine, that she had everything under control. But she couldn't. Not anymore. "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I keep thinking about forgiveness. I keep hearing those words in my head, but I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can forgive him." Her friend was silent for a moment, and then she gently replied, "Forgiveness doesn't mean you forget what happened or that you condone what was done to you. It doesn't mean that you are weak or that you are letting the person who hurt you off the hook. Forgiveness is for you, not for them. It's about freeing yourself from the chains of anger and hatred that are holding you captive." The girl sat quietly, absorbing her words. It was as if a light had been turned on in her mind. She realized that she had been holding on to the pain, the anger, for so long because it was the only thing that made her feel alive. It was her shield, her armor. She had never considered that letting go of it could be the key to her own freedom. Think about it this way, her friend continued. Jesus didn't forgive because the people who hurt him deserved it. He forgave because it was the only way to break the cycle of pain. And through his forgiveness, he found peace. You don't have to do it all at once. But if you're willing to take that first step, you'll be amazed at how much lighter you'll feel. Her friend's words lingered in her heart as they hung up the phone. She sat still for a long time, staring at the empty space in front of her. The thought of forgiveness still seemed daunting, but there was something powerful about it. Something that felt right. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small flicker of hope inside her. Maybe this was the way forward. The next day, she attended the seminar again. This time, she listened with a new perspective. The speaker's words, which had once seemed distant and difficult to understand, now felt deeply personal. He spoke of how forgiveness was not just a gift for others, but a gift for yourself, a way to reclaim peace and restore your soul. He spoke of the way Jesus forgave his persecutors, even while on the cross, showing that forgiveness was not a weakness, but a strength beyond measure. As the speaker shared his own story of loss and healing, the girl felt a shift inside her. She began to understand that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the actions of others, but about releasing herself from the grip of hate and allowing her heart to heal. After the seminar, as she walked to her car, her mind raced with thoughts of forgiveness. It was no longer just a distant idea, it was a path she could choose to take. She didn't have to forgive right away, but she knew that the first step was to open her heart, to begin to let go of the anger that had held her captive for so long. That night, as she lay in bed, she closed her eyes and whispered a simple prayer, God, help me find the strength to forgive. Help me heal my broken heart. She wasn't sure if she truly believed it yet, but something about saying the words made her feel less alone, less afraid. The next day, something incredible happened. She had a brief encounter with someone she hadn't spoken to in months, one of her former colleagues who had always been kind to her. As they spoke, she felt something stir inside her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of her anger. It was as if the chains that had bound her were loosening, just a little. She realized that forgiveness wasn't just about the person who had hurt her. It was about freeing herself from the prison of bitterness she had built around her heart. She didn't have to forget what had happened, and she didn't have to pretend that everything was okay. But she could choose to stop letting the pain control her. And in that moment, she made a decision. She decided that, for the first time since her parents' death, she was going to try. She was going to take the first step toward forgiveness, no matter how difficult it might be. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. She knew that. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a choice. And that choice, however small it seemed, was the beginning of her healing. And as she sat quietly in her room that night, she whispered again, God, help me forgive. But this time, she believed the words. The days following her decision were not as easy as she had hoped. The weight of her grief and anger still pressed down on her, though there was a slight change, a subtle shift within her that made her feel, for the first time in a long while, as though there might be a way forward. The idea of forgiveness still seemed daunting, and in the quiet moments, doubt crept in. What if she wasn't strong enough? What if the pain was too much to bear? The idea of confronting the person who had taken everything from her seemed impossible. How could she even begin to forgive him? Every day was a battle between wanting to heal and holding on to the anger that had become a part of her identity. The anger had been her shield, protecting her from the world, keeping her numb to the pain of loss. It gave her strength, or so she thought. It allowed her to feel like she could control something in a world that had been ripped apart by violence. But now, she was starting to realize that this anger wasn't the solution, it was the prison she had built for herself. The more she clung to it, the more she sank into despair. Her life seemed to fall into an endless loop. She would wake up, go through the motions of the day, and return to her empty house, where silence awaited her. She couldn't escape the constant reminder of what she had lost. The echoes of her parents' voices lingered in the air, and every small detail in the house, every picture frame, every piece of furniture, felt like a reminder of the family she no longer had. And yet, in the midst of the stillness, something was slowly changing. One afternoon, as she sat in the park, watching the children play, she found herself lost in thought. She had gone there for peace, for solitude, but now she realized that the peace she sought could not be found in the quiet of the world around her. It could only be found within herself. It was then that she saw an older woman walking by. The woman's gentle smile caught her attention, and something about the way she carried herself seemed to radiate peace. The woman stopped, as though drawn by some invisible force, and sat down beside her. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. It was a rare comfort to be in the presence of someone without needing to say anything. Finally, the woman turned to her and said softly, "I can see the pain in your eyes, dear. I've walked that path before. But holding on to the pain, it only keeps you chained. Forgiveness is the key to breaking free." The girl blinked, unsure of how to respond. She had heard these words before, at the seminar, from her friend, but hearing them from this stranger, from someone who had experienced her own share of suffering, made them feel different. Real. "I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how." "How do you forgive someone who took everything from you?" The woman's eyes softened. "Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing what was done. It means choosing to let go of the anger that is keeping you bound. It's not for the person who hurt you, it's for you. When you forgive, you are setting yourself free." The girl sat in silence, absorbing her words. The idea that forgiveness wasn't about the person who wronged her, but about releasing herself from the prison of bitterness, struck her deeply. She hadn't thought of it that way. She had always believed that forgiveness was a gift she would be giving to the person who hurt her, something she wasn't sure she could offer. But if forgiveness was about freeing herself, then perhaps it wasn't as impossible as she had thought. She nodded slowly, unable to find the words to express how she felt. The woman's presence was calming, and for the first time in a long while, the girl didn't feel so alone in her pain. Later that night, as she lay in bed, the woman's words echoed in her mind. She thought about the times her parents had tried to teach her about forgiveness when she was younger. Back then, the lessons had felt distant, abstract, something to learn, not something to live by. But now, in the face of her own suffering, they began to make sense. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It was about letting go, about breaking free from the chains of anger that had kept her trapped in the past. The next few days were filled with a strange quiet. She couldn't stop thinking about forgiveness, but now, there was less resistance. Less fear. It was as though the anger that had consumed her for so long had begun to loosen its grip, little by little. She wasn't ready to forgive completely, not yet, but for the first time, she was willing to try. One morning, she found herself standing in front of the mirror, looking at her reflection. She barely recognized herself anymore. The grief had etched lines of sorrow into her face, and the anger had hardened her eyes. But there was something different now. Something softening in her expression. She didn't know how to explain it, but she felt the stirrings of change deep inside her. That evening, she attended the Christian seminar again. This time, as she sat in the back, listening to the speaker, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The speaker spoke about the importance of letting go of anger and seeking reconciliation. Jesus forgave even those who nailed him to the cross, he said. Forgiveness is the way to healing. It's not a gift for the person who hurt you, it's a gift for yourself. It was as though a veil had been lifted from her eyes. The message was clear, and for the first time, she could see the truth in it. Forgiveness wasn't just about the other person, it was about setting herself free from the burden of hatred. She had been carrying that burden for so long, and now, she was beginning to realize that it was a choice. A difficult choice, but a choice nonetheless. That night, as she sat in her room, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. God, help me forgive. Help me let go of the anger and the pain. I don't know how, but I'm willing to try. It wasn't the perfect prayer, and she didn't feel magically healed. But it was a step. A small, shaky step towards something better. In the days that followed, she felt a shift. The anger didn't disappear, but it began to lose its grip. There were moments of doubt, moments when she questioned if she could truly forgive. But she held on to that small flicker of hope, that belief that forgiveness was possible, and each day, it grew a little brighter. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was the only way forward. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was walking that path, step by step, toward healing. The days seemed to stretch on endlessly as she grappled with the decision that lay ahead. She had come so far, but the hardest part was yet to come, the confrontation. The thought of facing the person who had taken everything from her still made her stomach twist with dread. What if it made things worse? What if, in the end, forgiveness wasn't enough to heal the wounds that had been inflicted? But despite her fear, there was a quiet determination growing inside her. The thought of continuing to live in this prison of anger was no longer bearable. She had come to understand that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the past, it was about freeing herself from the emotional chains that had held her captive for so long. She could never undo the hurt, but she could choose to move forward. She could choose to heal. It was a chilly afternoon when she decided to take the first step. She knew she couldn't do it alone, so she reached out to her friend, the one who had first introduced her to the idea of forgiveness. "I'm going to do it," she said quietly over the phone. "I'm going to meet him. I'm going to forgive him." Her friend was silent for a moment, as if processing the enormity of her decision. Then, in a voice full of warmth, she replied, "I'm proud of you. Remember, forgiveness is not about saying what happened was okay, it's about choosing peace over pain. And you deserve that peace." With those words echoing in her mind, she made her way to the address she had been given. The man who had taken her parents' lives was still living in the same rundown apartment building, a place that seemed like a reflection of the anger that had consumed him. When she arrived, her heart was racing, her hands trembling. She took a deep breath, reminding herself why she was there. She wasn't doing this for him, she was doing it for herself. She knocked on the door, her pulse pounding in her ears. The door creaked open, and there he was, standing in front of her, the man whose actions had forever altered her life. His eyes were hollow, as though he hadn't seen the light in years. She didn't know what to expect. Maybe he would show remorse. Maybe he wouldn't. But in that moment, none of that mattered. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice raspy. It was clear he had been living a hard, lonely life, and that perhaps, just like her, he was also haunted by his past. The girl swallowed hard, the words feeling like they were lodged in her throat. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times in her head, but now, standing here in front of him, the weight of it was overwhelming. She took a breath, then another, until finally, the words she had been holding back came rushing out. "I'm here because I've carried this pain for too long," she said softly. "And I can't carry it anymore. I forgive you. I forgive you for what you did." The silence between them felt heavy, thick with emotion. He didn't speak at first. She watched his face, searching for any sign of acknowledgement, any recognition of the weight of what she was offering. But his expression was unreadable, distant. "I know you can't change what happened," she continued, her voice steady now. "And I'm not saying it was okay. It wasn't. But I've realized that holding on to this anger is only hurting me. I need to let go. And so, I forgive you." The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of their breathing. She didn't know what she had expected, but this felt like a beginning, even if it was a small one. He stood there, silent, as if processing her words, but she could feel something shift, something break in the tension between them. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve any peace. "No one deserves peace more than you do," she said, the words coming from a place deeper than her anger. "It's not about what you deserve, it's about what I need to move forward. And I need to be free from this." He nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "I've been living with this guilt every day. I never thought I'd hear those words from you. I don't expect you to understand," she said, her eyes meeting his. "But I'm letting go now. I'm letting go of the hate. And I'm choosing to heal." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving behind a part of herself she had clung to for far too long. The weight that had been so heavy on her chest began to lift, even if only a little. The road ahead would still be long, and the pain would not disappear overnight, but for the first time, she felt like she was free to begin again. In the days that followed, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She continued her journey, knowing that there would be challenges ahead. Forgiveness didn't make everything right, but it had given her a chance to heal, to live without the chains of bitterness and anger. She threw herself into her work, into helping others who had faced loss and hardship. She spoke at events, shared her story, and became an advocate for forgiveness, not as a one-time act, but as a way of living. She knew that every day, she would have to choose forgiveness, just as she had chosen it that fateful afternoon. But now, with each passing day, the choice became easier, more natural. And in the quiet moments of her life, when she thought back on the pain, she no longer saw it as something that defined her. She saw it as something she had conquered, a battle fought, not with fists or anger, but with the most powerful weapon of all, love. In the days that followed her decision, the girl found herself in a strange, unfamiliar place. There was no grand moment of clarity or instantaneous peace, no overwhelming rush of relief. What she had done, what she had chosen to do, wasn't a one-time action. It was the start of a long and ongoing journey. The first few days after her meeting with him were filled with a deep sense of quiet. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but there was a subtle shift, a calm that had replaced the anger and the hatred she had carried for so long. The weight she had lived with for months, maybe even years, had begun to lift, but it wasn't as though all the scars had disappeared. The pain was still there, tucked away in the corners of her heart, but it no longer consumed her. She started to notice the small things, the way the sunlight streamed through the window in the mornings, how it felt to smile again, even if the smile didn't come easily. She hadn't realized how much of herself she had locked away. The act of forgiveness hadn't just been about the man who took her parents, it had been about unlocking her own heart, opening herself up to a possibility of peace she never thought possible. But even as she moved forward, she couldn't deny that there were moments of doubt, moments when the ghosts of the past would return. She would catch herself thinking of her parents, imagining their faces, and the grief would still threaten to overwhelm her. In those moments, she would remember her choice, not to forget the past, but to let go of its hold on her. She would take a deep breath, say a prayer, and remember that healing was a process, one she would continue to work through every day. One afternoon, as she walked through the park, one of the places she used to visit when the pain felt too much to bear, she saw a familiar face. It was the woman from the first day she had made the decision to forgive, the one who had spoken to her so gently about letting go of pain. The woman was sitting on the same bench, reading a book, her presence still as calming as it had been that first time they met. The girl walked up to her, a smile tugging at her lips. "I don't know if you remember me," she said softly, "but you spoke to me here a while ago. You told me about forgiveness. And I've been trying." The woman looked up, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "I do remember you," she said, setting the book aside. "How are you doing?" "I'm better," the girl said quietly, sitting beside her. "It's not perfect, but it's better. I feel lighter." The woman nodded, as though she had been waiting to hear that. Forgiveness isn't a one-time thing. It's a choice, day after day, but it brings peace. And peace is worth fighting for. The girl sat in silence, feeling the truth of the woman's words settle deep within her. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult. There would be moments when the anger and pain would resurface. There would be times when forgiveness would feel like an impossible choice. But the woman was right, peace was worth fighting for. And she had already made the hardest choice. She had taken the first step. That evening, as she sat in her apartment, reflecting on everything that had led her to this point, she felt a sense of clarity. She had been through the fire, had faced the darkest part of herself, and had come out the other side stronger. The process of forgiveness wasn't just about forgiving the person who had wronged her, it was about forgiving herself. She had to let go of the guilt, the anger, the self-blame that had kept her in a constant state of suffering. She had to allow herself to heal, to move forward without carrying the burden of past mistakes or injustices. And in the quiet of the night, as she whispered a prayer for strength and guidance, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She was not the same person she had been when she first walked into that seminar, when she had been so consumed by rage and grief. She was someone new, someone who had chosen to forgive, someone who had chosen peace. There was no dramatic change, no sudden transformation. There was only the slow, steady progress of a soul that had found its way back to light. She understood now that forgiveness was not a destination, but a journey that didn't have a clear endpoint, but one that was worth taking, no matter how long it took. As she lay down to sleep, she realized that she had not only forgiven him. She had forgiven herself. And in that, she had found the peace she had so desperately sought. The next morning, as she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw someone different. The anger was gone from her eyes, replaced with something softer, something warmer. It was the quiet strength that came from knowing she had chosen to break the cycle of hatred and pain. And in that moment, she knew, she was free. Not because everything was perfect, not because her life had been fixed, but because she had chosen forgiveness. She had chosen peace. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift she could give herself. Forgiveness had not undone the past, but it had opened the door to a future where she could heal, where she could move forward, and where she could be whole again. And with that realization, she knew that her journey was far from over. But now, with each step, she was walking in the light. She was walking in peace. As the girl sat in her quiet room, reflecting on the journey she had just gone through, she realized how much had changed inside of her. The transformation wasn't just a shift in her heart, it was a complete reawakening. She thought about the pain, the anger, the grief, and how it had once consumed every part of her. But now, she could look at those emotions from a distance, no longer controlled by them. Her mind wandered back to the first moment she heard the concept of forgiveness. Back then, it seemed like an impossible task, something that could never heal the wounds she had carried for so long. But now, she understood that forgiveness was not about erasing the past or pretending that nothing had happened, it was about freeing herself from the chains of bitterness and pain. It was about choosing peace, no matter how hard it might be. As she looked back, she realized that forgiveness had been the key that unlocked her ability to move forward. It didn't magically fix everything, but it gave her a new way of seeing things. Instead of focusing on what had been lost, she was learning to focus on what she could build. Instead of holding on to the anger, she had chosen to embrace the possibility of healing. And in doing so, she had set herself free. Now, as she stood at the edge of a new chapter in her life, she found herself wanting to share her story. She wanted others to understand that, no matter how dark things might seem, there is always a way to heal. She wanted them to know that forgiveness is not a sign of weakness, but a strength that leads to freedom. It was a journey, one that required courage, but it was a journey worth taking. The girl thought about the people who had helped her along the way, her friend, the woman in the park, the speakers at the seminar, and even the man she had forgiven. Each of them had played a part in her healing, whether they knew it or not. She realized how important it was to seek help, to let others in when you felt lost. No one should have to walk the road of healing alone. Her story wasn't over. She knew there would still be challenges ahead. There would be moments of doubt, of struggle, and yes, even more pain. But she was no longer afraid of those moments. Because now, she knew the power of forgiveness, and she knew that no matter how dark the night, there would always be a dawn. As she looked into the camera, she spoke directly to those watching, her voice calm and sincere. If you're struggling with pain, with anger, with grief, know that you are not alone. Healing is possible, and forgiveness is the first step toward freedom. Don't carry the weight of the past any longer. It's okay to forgive. It's okay to let go. You deserve peace, and you have the strength to find it. She paused, a gentle smile crossing her face. I hope my story has helped you, even just a little. If you feel moved by what I've shared, I encourage you to interact with this video, share your thoughts, or share your own story. I'd love to hear from you. Together, we can create a community of healing and hope. With that, she turned off the camera, feeling a deep sense of peace settle within her. The road to healing was long, but every step she took was a step towards something greater. And with that, she knew that she was ready to continue her journey, with an open heart, a peaceful mind, and the strength to forgive. If this story resonated with you, please give the video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more uplifting content. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What has your journey toward forgiveness been like? Let's start a conversation and support each other as we continue to grow and heal together. Your story matters.